Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Tony Lang, it's June 6, 2017, and we're here in Vancouver at the 21st International Congress of Parkinson's Disease and Movement Disorders put on by the International Parkinson and Movement Disorder Society. It's my great pleasure this afternoon to have the responsibility of interviewing an old friend and colleague, Dr. Jon Stoessl, also Canadian. And these interviews allow someone of significant renown to share with us how they got to where they are now and give us some wisdom and thoughts about how to help younger people advance in their careers as well. So, Jon, welcome.
Thank you.
This is obviously a very special event because of your role in the Congress, and maybe later we'll get you to share some of those experiences. But there's a certain number of important standard questions in this kind of interview, and let's start with the beginning. Why don't you tell us about your early years, including your education?
Well, I was actually born in England, and it's relevant because I think my father was a refugee who went to university and night school in England, ended up getting a PhD, but opportunities would have been limited for him in England. And so when I was about 3.5, we moved from London, England to London, Ontario. Important for me because I think it's emblematic of the enormous opportunities that Canada has offered me, and I have remained very grateful for that all my life. I think things could have turned out differently. So I went through pretty standard educational system in Canada and went to university at Western Ontario, where there was a program in physiology, a combined program in physiology and psychology, founded, I think, by Gordon Moggensen, who was a renowned hypothalamic physiologist interested in motivation and regulation of basic appetitive drives. I knew Gordon, but I didn't actually take courses from him. But as I entered into that program, I just became fascinated by the brain, and the rest just fell into place.
So now we know the neuroscience or the brain component. Why subsequently Parkinson's and movement disorders?
Oh, that's another happenstance. During my undergraduate years, I read a couple of papers for reading seminar courses. One of them was Wilder Penfield's description of stimulating the cortex and evoking these vivid memories. And another one was on stereotyped play behavior in rats, talking about sexual stereotyping, that males are not the same as females. And I was just intrigued by the power that the brain had over it. So that took me towards neuroscience, and then when I entered my neurology residency, I had to prepare a seminar. It was just one of the things that, we did on a regular basis as residents. And so as I was looking for a topic to talk about, I went through the library and came across one of the old Advances in Neurology series on Huntington's disease. I think it was volume 3 or something. It was very early in the series. And I really just started reading it and started reading about the anatomy of the basal ganglia and the neurochemistry of the basal ganglia. And the whole idea that human behavior could be regulated by a bunch of connections and release of certain chemicals intrigued me. And that's what led me into Parkinson's. Around the time, shortly before I finished my residency, Donald Calm was recruited from the NIH to Vancouver. And the McGears, I just finished interviewing Pat McGear for the same exercise. The McGears were there, of course, and positron emission tomography was just getting started. The McMaster group had just identified the ability to visualize dopaminergic pathways in the brain. You may have even been an author on that paper.
My patient was the first one with the picture and the cover.
On the cover of Nature.
Yeah.
So that combination of things just seemed optimal to me, and so off I went to do a fellowship with Donald Collin, and then got into PET at that time. Shortly into that fellowship, I realized that I wasn't going to be spending time in the lab, really training in the lab. So I set up a second fellowship and went to England, where I was fortunate to work with the Iversons.
Yes, I remember that. So you've named a couple of people. Tell us about the role models and heroes that you've had over your career.
Well, that's a really important thing. So you've heard about a couple of them. Donald, who's always been a provocative figure, but has enormous insights, and I've always valued that, his willingness to attack established views of things. The Iversons, the head of neurology when I was a trainee, and also I guess he was no longer officially the head when I came back, but remained an incredibly important influence, as you would appreciate, was Henry Barnett. And so I've been very fortunate during my career to be exposed to true giants. Now, in our day-to-day activities, we get exposed to leaders in the field, and I think that's something we'll probably come back to. But I think it's really important for young people to be exposed to these larger-than-life individuals, because it does give you something to live up to. The other person I would say is actually my father, who was a scientist, was not renowned, but was a refugee who then worked very hard. And I remember him leaving early in the morning to go to work, coming home for dinner, going back into work at night if an experiment was running. And I think it was the seeing that example of somebody who was able to flee the Holocaust and still make a career and do fairly well that gave me a strong influence to live up to.
Clear dedication, obviously. Tell us about how you perceive, or what you perceive, your most important contributions to our field.
So perhaps the work for which I'll be best recognized was an accident, was the placebo effect, the identification of dopamine release contributing to mechanisms of the placebo effect. And I think an important issue there is that we were not doing the studies for that reason at all. It was for a much more banal reason, and a very bright person who was working with us recognized that there was some disparity between controls, between an open baseline and a saline injection, and it wasn't immediately apparent what the basis was for the difference. So I think, and once he pointed this out to me, of course, we were fully cognizant of the significance of the finding. So I think, and it's something Pat said as well, is that you can't stick too firmly to your hypothesis. You need to look at the data, and sometimes need to think about the data quite a while to uncover what they mean. So that was clearly one of the most important things. I think the other things are probably use of imaging biomarkers to look at disease progression and to try and understand compensatory changes in the brain. But we've still got plenty to do.
And you'll keep doing it, I hope.
Hopefully, yes, for a while, if I can get funded.
It is interesting that technology or technique was just coming on board as you were starting your training in this, and a lot of people might not have been able to capitalize and use it as wisely and as well as you have. So I think the contributions you've had in that field are really quite astounding. Through the course of that and any other aspects of your scientific career, how have you seen, or what do you see as some of the biggest challenges you've faced?
I think the challenges are more frustrations, really. I mean, I think if you have an idea that you really know you want to pursue and you feel it will deliver, It's always difficult when the funding agencies don't see eye to eye with you, and I don't imagine I'm the only person who's experienced that.
Very definitely. Other challenges you've faced career challenges or academic challenges apart from the third reviewer or whatever?
You know, I would say I've been pretty fortunate, and in fact, that's one thing. If anybody had told me when I was beginning medical school that I would have the opportunity to do the things that I do on a daily basis, or that I would have had the experiences that I've had over the course of my professional life, I would have told them they were crazy. I never dreamt any of this would happen to me. So on the whole, the things I deal with are frustrations. There's, you know, the frustration that comes with an administrative role. I think you've experienced that. And with increasing bureaucracy and regulatory hurdles. But overall, we have people, clinician investigators, clinician scientists, whatever you want to call them, have the best of all worlds. We get to see patients who are interesting, who tell us what the appropriate questions are to ask. It's quite gratifying if you can play some role in improving their lives, and then you get to go off and play for a while, pursuing questions, and then you get to go off and interact with the world leaders in the field and hear what their ideas are. There's not a lot to complain about that.
This is true. We are blessed. There's no question about it. Can you tell us where, from your perspective, where you feel the field is headed right now?
Well, clearly, I mean, we've had a huge breakthrough in terms of being able to treat the symptoms of Parkinson's, or at least many of the symptoms of Parkinson's. Obviously, many challenges remain. But I think the biggest thing is going to be, can we develop treatments that will slow Parkinson's and other conditions, both the movement disorders and other neurodegenerative disorders, that will slow the progression or stop the disease. I remain hopeful, but I also always have a healthy dose of skepticism, part of which is related to the fact that we're never dealing with one disease. Parkinson's disease, it's clear, is not one. So I think where we're headed right now, I would say the advances in genetics, to which I have not been a very big contributor at all, to me, those big advances are not in terms of identifying specific genes, but rather shining a light on shared pathways that are likely to lead to a common final path of destruction. So when we have those insights, we can try and develop better therapies, and it appears that there are some that are in a pretty advanced stage of development. To do that, we will need better models. The animal models have been useful in terms of identifying symptomatic therapy, but up until quite recently have not been very useful for testing disease modification strategies. I think that's changing quite rapidly, and better biomarkers.
So with that, that background of where things are going, when a young trainee comes to you and asks advice as to what they should be doing or what direction they should head, what are you telling them?
I never advise people on what to do. I advise them to go where their heart takes them, because I think if you do what's hot today, it will be lukewarm tomorrow and ice cold a month later. And if you are doing what you really enjoy, then your nose will take you along the path, and of course you will modify it. Hopefully you will modify it over the course of your life. But we're lucky in that we have enormous amounts of literature that are easier to access. It makes it more difficult to filter sometimes, but you can kind of modify what you do, and I think it's really dangerous if people get pigeonholed into doing an identified specific need.
Now you've indicated how blessed we are in what we do, and how there are very few other professions that might have the ability to interact and treat the patients do the research and then to interact on an international basis. But apart from that joy, if you could turn the clock back 20 years, would you do anything differently?
Well, maybe not much, but there are a couple of things. I might, maybe not 20 years ago, but in the last 10 or 15 years, perhaps, I might have devoted a little bit less time to administrative duties. But one thing that's, I think, relevant to the society is that at an earlier career stage, I tended to shy away from meetings. I was shy, and I would.
Shy?
Yeah, I know. I tended to believe that if something was worth knowing, if it were a believable result, it would appear in print. And so I would often read. And I do have a slight regret about that. I don't think it's harmed me that much, but I think I realize now the incredible importance of networking, because there's nobody who has all the skills and all the correct perspectives. So one of the greatest parts of the profession and of the society is that ability to, if you have a question or you want to bounce an idea off somebody, you just go up and say hello to them. And that's a more difficult lesson to learn.
You've mentioned the society, so I'll ask you right off about the role of the society, the impact and the important role of the society. How do you perceive what the society is and what it's accomplished and its role?
Well, the society has obviously done phenomenally well. I was actually a member back in 1986 when it first opened up. I think I dropped membership for a couple of years when I was a fellow, because even though the membership dues were not high, I didn't have
More
a
than
lot
a
of
fellow
money.
could afford, right?
But otherwise, I've been a member pretty much since its inception, and it's come a huge way. Obviously, the journal, which you have edited, has come a long way, and it's been a great privilege to be involved in the journal. But I think what I see is that there's an increasing interest and engagement of young people, of bringing people into the field who might not otherwise, you know, think of attending a movement disorders meeting, basic scientists who have interests that are related. And so we're seeing that happening increasingly. The society plays a major educational role around the world. And I had the privilege a few years ago to serve a 3-year term on the International Executive Committee, and really gives you insight into how well the society is run and what a very professional organization it is. And of course, with my role in this meeting, there's been a lot of preparation involved, but the Secretariat is just stunning in terms of the support that they provide. But so too are the leadership, because without micromanaging and getting in the way, they're there to provide guidance and counsel when you need it.
Now, you mentioned earlier your dad going back to the lab late at night and the challenges that he had in maintaining a scientific career. Work-life balance is a critical issue, and increasingly we hear our residents expressing concerns about work-life balance, and maybe looking at the way we practice is possibly not the way to do or accomplish that. What are your thoughts about work-life? Work harder, okay.
There are things I enjoy doing outside of work, but I actually like to work. I don't like every aspect of my work, but I like to work, and I naturally tend to wake up early in the morning, and what do? You go to your computer, and
it's all those darn emails.
Yeah, well, I could do without some of that, but I enjoy working, and I think it is important to have some things outside work, but I don't think they should run one's life. I mean, for me, I like kayaking. As long as I'm upright in the water. I've done the alternative as well and don't recommend it so much. And I play piano and love that. And I like to read some non-medical. I find it easier to fall asleep at night if I've read something that isn't related to medicine or science. But obviously, there's not a lot of time for that during the work year.
You're an accomplished pianist. Can you
I
say a little bit about
accomplished,
that?
but
I understand you're pretty darn good.
I was pretty serious about it when I was younger, and I still enjoy it a lot. And
you have a lovely piano overlooking some
waterway. The piano doesn't overlook the water, but it's a very nice piano that I enjoy. And if I get home at a time when it won't be bothering the neighbors too much, I may just go and play for a while.
Wonderful. We're getting towards the end, and one of the questions that we're regularly asked is about whether you've experienced biases or barriers in your career development, and whether you think that those, if they existed then, are different, or do young investigators, young people in our society face different kinds of biases and challenges that you don't have?
I don't know that I've faced biases or roadblocks. It's always appealing to attribute a failure to, somebody else. But I don't think I've been held back. For the one, so a big issue that I mentioned already is that I think Canada is still a place where you can come, and if you work hard and you're semi-intelligent, you can, do quite well. Sadly, not all countries are like that, and I think that's a big issue. The one thing I would say that's really apparent is the challenges we face, not talking about any of the other biases and histories, in Canada, the treatment of the First Nations, and during the war, the internment of Japanese Canadians and so on. Those are black marks on our history. But the big challenge, I think, is women. And it's not really because people are biased against women. I don't think twice about whether somebody is a man or a woman in terms of their abilities. But the reality is that it's still very difficult, I think, for an intelligent, hardworking woman to have a career and balance that with family considerations. And I don't think there are easy answers to that. And I've thought a lot about it over the course of my own career. So I think those are the challenges that we face now, because increasingly women, as they should be, are entering a domain that was more traditionally male.
Okay, so Jon, final comments. Any off-script thoughts, challenges? Tell us about where you're going now. What are your plans over the next little while, and how are you going to get there?
Well, personally, there's still things I would like to do in research, looking at, abnormal protein, at role of astrocytes, and microglia, and looking at different neurochemical systems in the brain, better insight into brain compensatory mechanisms. But from a personal perspective, I'm starting to think about what retirement will look like. And I think that I will probably want to continue to see patients, perhaps at a different pace, and that if I can get funding, that I will want to continue doing research. And I might be prepared to give up the email and meetings.
Wisdom beyond your years. Well, Jon, this has been a real pleasure. I'd like, on behalf of the Society and the young people, hopefully, that will be looking at these videotapes, I'd like to thank you very much for your insights.
Well, thank you, and it's an honor to be interviewed by you. Thank you.
Thank you.